Baroness Natalie Bennett is the former Green Party leader and Sheffield Green Party member and also a member of the House of Lords. Good afternoon, Natalie.
Good afternoon, Paulette. It's lovely to be with you, even under these circumstances.
So what do you make of what Liz is saying there then, Natalie?
Well, I think Liz did a great job of really outlining these at least four major threats. I think perhaps she was being optimistic and trying to introduce balance by saying we don't know which way this is going to go. If you look at the government's own words, it talks about its plans to, quote, minimise the burden of environmental assessments, close quote. It talks about make consultation requirements more proportionate, close quote. It refers to reforming the habitats and species regulation and accelerating major infrastructure planning. I'm afraid none of those sound like anything like more protection for nature. It sounds like we've already got one of the most nature depleted parts of this planet, and this is going to take away what little protections we have now.
Does the government have a choice then? We know that the economy is on its knees. Aren't they doing what they need to do to get the economy and our natural environment, because at the end of the day, we need to be putting in a system that means that we can start to move beyond and move up. Do you think that that's the right direction to go in, Natalie?
I think that we absolutely need massive changes. You think about how so many people with the cost of living crisis are struggling to put food on the table, keep a roof over their head, 0 hours contracts, insecure employment, the huge pressure on NHS from our really poor level of public health, air pollution, all of those things that desperately need to be tackled. But every single thing the government's doing, whether it's pushing through more roads for air pollution, whether it's taking away protection for workers in their so-called planned investment zones, everything is designed to make it worse. And the whole arrangement of this is, we'll make a pie bigger, and so therefore the people who are getting crumbs will get a few more crumbs. What I would say is, yes, we need a fundamental restructure of our economy so that the economy works for people instead of people working for the economy. And that means actually ensuring that we have properly funded NHS, properly funded schools. We've actually got organisations like the big banks, big multinational companies saying, don't do this, invest in education and skills instead. That's what our businesses actually need. Exactly what the government is not doing. Indeed, it's talking about more austerity, more public spending cuts.
I'm talking to Baroness Natalie Bennett. She is, three hats here actually, former Green Party leader, Sheffield Green Party member and member of the House of Lords. Also talking to Liz Ballard from the Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust. And we're talking about the changes. Almost 600 laws have been axed by ministers trying to boost the economy by encouraging more development to take place. And we're talking about a little bit of the mini budget that you may not have spotted. This is about the government axing almost 600 laws that could protect our nature and environment, and we're talking, quite a few charities have called it an attack on nature. Environmental charities and wildlife trusts have called it an attack on nature and have got together to try to do something about this. I'm talking to Liz Ballard from the Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust, and I'm talking to Baroness Natalie Bennett. She is a former Green Party leader, Sheffield Green Party member and member of the House of Lords. Can I just go back and talk about the way things were? I mean, these plans have been revealed, Liz. We do know that recent public campaigns, like we talked about the overdevelopment on this show of Althorpe Fields, so they've had an impact, these campaigns, because of environmental impact assessments. Does this change mean then that these assessments may not happen and that people who, like the Althorpe Fields campaigners, might not have an opportunity to do anything about changes within their communities?
Right, well, there's sort of two aspects to this. So first of all, the legislation around environmental impact assessments, it's set out in our planning laws, but they came from the EU originally under a particular directive. And that's one of the areas that's going to be reviewed under the retained EU laws bill, because understandably we have left the European Union and our laws need some reform. So we don't quite know what's going to happen, but yes, the environmental impact assessment is part of those regulations that came originally from Europe that were put into our own national legislation. So we're uncertain as to what will happen to that. And it is part of the planning process that we are very aware of. A lot of campaigners use it as a way of understanding what the impact will be on the natural environment and checking whether developers have properly assessed that. And that was certainly an area that we all collectively looked at with our Thorpe Action Group about how our Thorpe would be affected. So it is a really key piece of how local communities can challenge planning.
So optimistic, but not sure what these changes may mean then for for that assessment.
What I would say is I'm not optimistic.
Right.
I'd like to be optimistic, but there's just so little information. And I think, as Natalie has referred to, there's this retained EU laws bill, which is one piece of news very recently that came out literally last week. But at the same time, the mini budget came out with the growth plan. The growth plan also has within it about investment zones, and we don't know where they'll be in South Yorkshire, but we're one of the sort of county areas, as they call them, that's been put forward. And those will have absolutely kind of a sweeping away of the burdens, as Natalie's read out. So the burdens about habitat and species, the burdens about environmental assessments. So the kind of narrative at the moment, the story that's coming from government is that these will be reviewed and most likely eroded. So we are really, really concerned as Wildlife Trusts and environmental organisations that this is an opportunity for the government to remove the foundations that we use to protect our natural environment. So we do really need people, if they are concerned about this, to write to their MPs and say, we really want to see a strengthening of environmental protection, not a weakening.
Let's just go to Natalie for a moment. So, Natalie, I just want to ask you briefly about fracking. There's been a lot of talk about that recently. We've talked about it on Radio Sheffield. So, the government decision to end the moratorium on fracking. What does that word even mean, Natalie?
Well, the moratorium came about, people may recall, when there was a huge amount of public protests, including many in the South Yorkshire region. I've stood at the gates of proposed fracking sites with many local protesters, and local resistance, and the fact that as they kept fracking over in Blackpool, they kept having earthquakes. These things led to a moratorium, so that was a temporary halt. That's what the word means. And so now the government says they're taking that away. They never brought in a ban, unlike a ban that already exists in Scotland, Wales, and many parts of continental Europe. But it's interesting that Liz Truss, on her morning media round this morning, Lancashire BBC Radio, credit to them.
Well, let me stop you there. Let me just stop you there, Natalie, because I've got a little piece of audio that you might be interested in. You're probably going to, you've mentioned it there. So Liz Truss talking to us on BBC Local Radio in Lancashire. They've experienced tremors. Their presenter Graham Liver suggested that people are worried about this.
Why can't you tell us this morning there won't be a return to fracking in Lancashire?
Well, I don't accept the premise of your question.
Why?
It's certainly the case at present. Because what I've said is if there is local consent, we will go ahead. We need to explore where there is local consent and where there isn't, and we're still doing that work.
What does local consent look like, Prime Minister?
Well, the Energy Secretary will be laying out in more detail exactly what that looks like, but it does mean making sure there is local support for going ahead.
So, Natalie, what do you think about that then? I mean, obviously you've heard that before. How does that make you feel then as someone that's campaigned against fracking?
Well, I think the pauses and the stuttering were very clear that the government actually is just using catchphrases without having any idea what they mean. I have no doubt at all, in the context of being over in Lancashire where Liz Truss was speaking to outside the site where they were trialling fracking there, being with the protest was also hearing the number of toots of support and waves of support and thumbs up that you got from local people. There will never be local consent there. But I think there's two bigger issues here that I think Liz really clearly outlined. One is just the level of chaos, the uncertainty. The wildlife trusts say we don't know what's going to happen. That's also the case with the environmental land management schemes for farmers. It's clearly journalists have been briefed that these are going to be replaced by an acreage payments. And then the government comes out and says, oh, well, no, we're not going to change anything. But no one really believes that. And also, as Liz was highlighting, the issue of democracy. We have a huge concentration of power and resources in this country down in Westminster. Decisions are made there rather than made in local communities. And what the government's proposing is not only an attack on nature, it's also a huge attack on democracy.
Liz, are we fighting a losing battle, do you think?
Well, if I thought that, I wouldn't do my job. You have to be optimistic. You have to believe that we can turn around the decline of nature, and we very much champion the idea of nature recovery, bringing back wildlife, bringing back nature for everyone to experience and enjoy. And picking up on something that you mentioned earlier, this is not the economy or the environment. This is about the economy growing in harmony with nature. There is no reason to say it's either the economic growth or it's the natural environment. We can work those things together along with a just society. So it's really important that we find positive, collaborative solutions that work. And things like the farming scheme that was proposed and developed over quite a few years by the government, that was imminently going to come out, really likely to come out very soon for farmers, a real lifeline where they're struggling, was a really good opportunity to see how the economy and nature could work together and support local farmers. But, once again, we don't know what's going to happen to that. That sounds like it may be going.
Well, we need to say that we've contacted the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. They said a minister wasn't available to speak to us about the changes. They did send us a statement, which I'll read to you. A government spokesperson says claims we intend to go back on our commitment to the environment are simply not right. A strong environment and a strong economy go hand in hand. We've legislated through the Environment Act. We're going to continue to improve our regulations and wildlife laws in line with our ambitious vision. We want every corner of our country to prosper too. Bureaucratic processes in the planning system do not necessarily protect the environment, so by making sure we have the right regulations for our nation, we can make this happen. Natalie, can I ask you, with your three hats on, what's your response to that?
Well, I think what's one of the things that's telling in that is this government has, on all sort of quarters, saying, oh, we're totally different to the last government, we're doing things differently. That's been the whole approach. Yet in that statement, they say we have legislated for the Environment Act. The Environment Act that I spent many, many hours in the House of Lords trying to improve, fighting to improve, and also sometimes even working with Zach Goldsmith, the Tory minister, who has since been sacked from his DEFRA post by Liz Truss. That was the last government to act. And every signal we're getting from this government is that they want to undo any positive measures that have been instituted in the last 5, 10, 20 years and just go all out to concrete over the countryside, to cut down the trees, and to try and create a space for tax dodging, low-paying companies that exploit workers.
Well, we're going to continue to talk about this, I'm sure. Baroness Natalie Bennett, Sheffield Green Party member and former leader of the party. Liz Ballard as well from Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust. Thank you both very much.